Get started then. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Madison, and I'll be the technical manager for this session today on the cost and cost effectiveness of ANH programs and interventions, chaired by Carol Levin. Thank you all for taking part in ANH 2021, and we look forward to a really robust and interactive session today. A quick reminder that everything you might need to access conference materials and the program can be found at the ANH Academy website at anh-academy.org/ANH2021. Before Carol takes the conversation forward, I just have a few technical announcements to ensure that our experience is as smooth and interactive as possible. For this session, this session will be recorded and posted on the ANH Academy website following the conference. Second, all participants have been muted, but please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and the organization that you work with. We encourage you to share your webcam feed during the session, but if your connection is bad, we recommend turning your video off. Later in the session, we'll open up the conversation for Q&A, but if you have questions throughout the session, please drop them in the chat box and we will do our best to answer them during the presentations and again during the Q&A session at the end. Lastly, if you're having any technical issues, please check your audio and internet connections, and you can always try to reconnect to the session using the same Zoom link and password you used to join us today. If you're having further technical issues, please send me a private message using the chat box. So I think that's everything from me. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I will pass it over to Carol. I think you're muted, Carol.
Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening to many of you. We're thrilled that you can join us today for this research session on cost and cost effectiveness of agriculture, nutrition, and health interventions. Today, we'll be having 5 presentations. I'm going to ask Chris, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen. So as I'm speaking, we can write. Thank you. So we are having 5 presentations today, and pleased to tell you that the first 4, and I'll introduce those in a moment, are results from a learning lab that was offered last week on economic evaluation of multisectoral nutrition strategies. If you like what you hear and you want to learn more, then of course we invite you to access the Learning Lab materials, which will be posted on the ANH Academy. So today, what we'll be sharing with you are a common framework from the SEAMS Nutrition Common Approach on Economic Evaluation. SEAMS stands for Strengthening Economic Evaluation for Multisectoral Strategies for Nutrition. It is a common approach that aims to standardize the collection of costs and estimation of cost effectiveness, benefit cost analysis across very different types of interventions, as many of us know. So Christopher Kemp, formerly of University of Washington, currently of Johns Hopkins University, will do the first presentation. Our second presentation will be Aisha Twalibu, from the International Food Policy Research Institute. Aisha will present work on costing and scaling up a community-based nutrition-sensitive early childhood development intervention in Malawi. Our second presentation, also using the SEAMS Nutrition Common Approach. Our third presentation will be by Sagun KC from Helen Keller International, based in Nepal. He will present on cost and cost efficiency of a scaled up multisectoral nutrition program in Nepal called Suahara 2. And the fourth presentation of this cluster from the SEAMS Nutrition program and project will be by Chloe Pewitt from Stony Brook University. Sorry, Chloe, this indicates USAID, but Chloe is affiliated with Stony Brook University. And Chloe will be sharing research on the measurement of the variety of benefits in economic analyses for nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive program, a systematic review looking at what is and is not currently being captured in these complex evaluations. And lastly, we'll be joined, and then our final presentation will be by Winston Tan. He will be presenting his research on blockchain technology adoption in digitalization of food systems, a scoping review, and he will touch on cost effectiveness in that presentation. The way we'll work today is we will stop and take questions after the first 4 presentations that are linked to Seams Nutrition, and then Winston will give a presentation and we'll have a final question and answer period. So if there are no questions at this time, I'd like to invite Chris Kemp from Johns Hopkins University to give his presentation. Chris, over to you. And a reminder, you each have 8 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay. And you can hear me all right. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Christopher Kemp. As Carol said, from Johns Hopkins University, although 3 weeks ago I was at the University of Washington. Today I'm representing the Seams Nutrition team, including collaborators from the University of Washington, Helen Keller International, and the International Food Policy Research Institute, led by Dr. Carol Levin. I'm going to start our session by briefly describing a common approach to the measurement of costs and benefits of multi-sector nutrition programs. And I'm going to start to compare results from the application of that common approach across interventions from 3 different countries. So we believe that evidence generated by economic evaluation of multi-sector nutrition programs will be absolutely critical to moving our field forward and promoting investment in essential and effective programs, especially in lower resource settings. We also believe that this evidence is currently very much underdeveloped. Multi-sector nutrition sensitive actions are essential to achieving the 2025 World Health Assembly targets for nutrition and the Sustainable Development Goals. However, decision-making around implementation of multi-sector nutrition programs must be supported by appropriate cost and affordability information so that only the most effective and cost-efficient interventions to promote food systems are implemented. Unfortunately, evidence on program costs and benefits is lacking. There's little evidence of the cost effectiveness of multi-sector and integrated approaches to improve nutrition in general. And what is available, critical interventions or cost and affordability data associated with critical interventions are missing. For example, cost and cost effectiveness of marketing and pricing healthy foods and creating demand for healthy foods. Moreover, the transparency and standardization of methods has been poor, resulting in a lack of comparability across studies. However, there's been a recent surge of calls for integration of cost effectiveness and benefit cost estimates with impact evaluations, and a lot of promise for the field moving forward. So Seams Nutrition, or Strengthening Economic Evaluation for Multi-Sector Strategies for Nutrition, was developed in response to this need for higher quality data. It's a collaboration between a lot of folks that you'll see on the bottom, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It seeks to define the most appropriate and standardized methods for measuring cost and cost effectiveness of integrated multi-sector nutrition strategies and programs, and then to apply that approach in a series of programs in several low-income countries. Did I go backwards? Okay, so we've set about developing this common approach. The common approach builds from and aligns to existing guidance for standardized methods for costing and economic evaluation, including the Global Health Cost Consortium reference case, the Harvard reference case for benefit cost analysis, and the IDSI reference case for economic evaluation. In the first stage, the idea is to map your complex intervention to a typology of multi-sector nutrition interventions to promote an apples-to-apples comparison across complex and very different programs. In the second stage, to map the impact pathway for that program and identify individual cost drivers, benefits, activities, and inputs along the impact pathway. Then to use and appropriately adapt the standardized cost data, a set of cost data collection tools, and to actually collect cost data alongside an impact evaluation, and then finally to compare costs and benefits. So I'll just briefly introduce the idea of mapping a complex intervention to a standardized set of intervention typologies, and to think about mapping your interventions to a program impact pathway or pathways of effect. Most large programs do have an established program impact pathway or logic model that describes how they plan to get from their activities to their measurable outcomes and impact. We like the idea of mapping this program impact pathway onto a standardized set of of impact pathways for or standardized typology of nutrition interventions to promote the comparability of what you're talking about in terms of complex multi-sector nutrition programs. So here's a highly simplified version of a program impact pathway to show how this can be done. And what we've done is we've broken out the activities into 3 buckets: activities related to increasing demand for nutritious food, increasing supply of nutritious food, so those are the agriculture activities, and then underlying enabling environment activities, which make the intersection of those previous 2 activities more effective. These activities also increase the affordability of food and reduce the burden of infectious disease and or acute malnutrition. So we've been developing this common approach and applying it in 6 different countries with 6 different programs supported by our partners in Nepal, Burkina Faso, Kenya, Bangladesh, and Malawi. And I'm going to talk about 3 projects, 2 of which you're going to hear in much more detail in a second. One is the Nutrition Embedded Evaluation Program Impact Evaluation in Malawi. The second is the Targeting and Realigning Agriculture to Improve Nutrition, or TRAIN, in Bangladesh, and then Suahara 2 in Nepal. So these are very different and interventions with different levels of complexity and different scales of impact. The NEPI, or Nutrition Embedded Evaluation Program Impact Evaluation in Malawi, is supported by Save the Children, and it leveraged Malawi's national network of community-based childcare centers, or preschools, to provide households with young children with agricultural inputs and nutrition behavior change communication. You'll hear a lot more about that from Aisha. Targeting and Realigning Agriculture to Improve Nutrition, or TRAIN, is an ongoing maternal and child health and nutrition behavior change communication strategy that's integrated with an agricultural credit program aiming to improve production diversity and income generation in Bangladesh. And Suahara 2 is a large-scale multi-sector nutrition program supported by USAID and implemented by Helen Keller International in collaboration with Nepal's government, reaching over half of the country. You'll learn more about Suahara 2 from Sagun Casey. So we've applied the SEAMS Nutrition Common Approach to analyze cost data from each of these programs and generate comparable estimates. Each study took a societal perspective, at least, meaning that we wanted to include costs incurred by implementers as well as costs incurred by community and government. We also wanted to understand the costs required to put each program into place, which we call startup cost, or the cost to keep each program running, or the recurrent cost. We analyzed financial data. We also micro-costed using qualitative data to understand out-of-pocket and opportunity costs by program participants and partners. There were, of course, variations. In Bangladesh, we produced costs for each additional intervention component, and in Nepal, we produced different costs for individual districts across diverse geographies. So the common approach allows us to break down costs by input and activity and other ways to disaggregate cost in order to identify cost drivers. Here we see cost estimates for these 3 programs by input. Like many programs, the largest cost driver by input here are personnel time, and the second is, and travel is also a major cost driver. We can also break down cost by activity. For TRAIN and Suahara, the most expensive activities were the household visits for behavior change. NEPI, however, devoted almost half of its cost to training, while the next most expensive activity was community events, again, related to behavior change. And finally, we can actually break down costs by the pathway of intended effect of the intervention components. For all 3 programs, the largest cost driver were activities related to increasing demand for nutritious food, so again, behavior change, activities related to increasing supply of nutritious foods, and to improve the enabling environment for nutrition were less expensive. So we believe this common approach has a number of advantages. Used appropriately. Am I out of time? Oh, thank you. So these estimates produced using this common approach are directly comparable across complex programs, and they're directly actionable and can help inform stakeholder decision-making. Especially the ability to disaggregate cost drivers by input and activity will help improve program efficiency. And we have a set of generic tools available to guide the entirety of your cost study, which should help lower the bar for everyone to think about integrating costing into evaluations of multi-sector nutrition programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you for setting the stage for our next 3 presentations. Please note that Christopher Kemp may have to leave the session because of early morning obligations, and I will be around to answer any questions. But what I'd like to do now is introduce our next speaker, Aisha Twalibu will be sharing her experience of applying the senior nutrition approach in Malawi. Take it away, Aisha.
All right, thanks, Carol. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right, let me share my screen in a moment. All right, picking up, hi everyone. First of all, my name is Aisha, as Carol has introduced me. I worked on this intervention that we are about to present on, and this was when I was working for Save the Children as a research coordinator. So
Aisha,
picking up, yes.
We can't see your slides.
Oh, okay. Let me just try sharing again. I can see my slides. Yes, are you able to see it now?
No.
Okay, let me start sharing again.
I think, can the facilitators, I thought you said you had a copy of the slides. Is it possible as a backup to be prepared to share Aisha's slides?
Yes, we will do that from our end.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can
Aisha,
share.
would you like?
Okay, just give me a moment, sorry.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we're still not seeing them, Aisha. Oh, there they are. Well done. We got it. But you're on mute.
Sorry for that.
Okay, we can hear you and we can see your slides. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you for your patience. Hello everyone. Sorry for that technical challenge. My name is Aisha, as I've already been introduced. I happened to work on this intervention while I was working for Save the Children in Malawi. Picking up from what Chris has said, I'll be presenting on the costing and scaling up of NIP, which was a community-based integrated agriculture, nutrition, and early childhood development intervention that was implemented in Malawi. As a background, as an introduction, community-based preschool meals can provide an effective platform for implementing integrated agriculture and nutrition programs. However, as we know, there is little evidence on the cost, but as well as on the cost efficiency of such interventions. Here, we present to you the evidence from such an intervention that attempted to answer the following questions. 1, can preschool meals provide a platform to scale up interventions to improve diets as well as nutrition? The second question that we're trying to answer is, can these synergies from combining different sectors lead to gains in cost effectiveness? Again, this was briefly touched on by Chris. So what I'm just going to highlight here is that this was a community-based childcare center, or preschools as they're known in Malawi, that utilized this platform to reach the preschoolers aged between the ages of 3 to 5 years old, their younger siblings, as well as parents. And this was reaching them with 2 main things: trainings, in diets, nutrition, as well as WASH-related activities, but also they were provided with agricultural farm inputs. And the main aim of NIP was really to change the behaviors that were related to the diets as well as the agricultural production. This was a one-year intervention, and it was implemented in Zomba. Okay, now back to the methods. And again, Chris touched briefly on this. So what I'll just highlight is that for NIP, we applied the SIMS nutrition framework retrospectively. And again, in order for us to assess the financial as well as the economic costs of the NIP intervention, which included costs of community contributions as well as the beneficiary time. SIMS, as have been highlighted by Chris, is actually a standardized framework. So what it allowed us to do was to map the activities to the framework as well as standardized cost categories. We also applied a mixed methods approach, which was used to measure and allocate the cost for the program activities and inputs using financial expenditure data and microcosting. To estimate the financial costs, we collected program level expenditures from administrative records, which were coded by input, as well as activity using standardized categories that Chris touched on earlier. We also conducted in-depth preschool as well as community surveys, and this was periodically between October of 2015 when we conducted our baseline and 2017 when we concluded the NIP impact evaluation. And again, this was to gather the data on resource quantities and utilize time allocation data from a household survey to track the beneficiary opportunity costs. Now, what did we find? As you can see on this slide, we actually have cost by input category as well as cost by activity category. And that's pretty much one of the cool things or the important aspects of the SIMS approach, in that it allows us to break down our cost by activity as well as identify the cost drivers by different program components. So on my left here, we're looking at the cost by input category. And again, this is something that Chris touched on. Like many programs or this kind of interventions, the bulk of the NIP cost was personnel, which is about 38%. And because we had provided farm inputs, we also see that the supplies, this again, including those farm inputs such as seeds, came up about 21%, and to be specific, the agriculture supplies were about 2%. Again, this highlights that this was actually a core component of the NIP program, being an agriculture and nutrition integrated intervention. On my right there, we see the cost by activity category. And again, what we can see there is that training was actually the largest cost driver at almost half of all the program costs. So that's about 48%. But we also see that there are other main cost drivers. And to be specific, we have school meals provision, which are about 19%. And again, for this intervention, we had to rely on the community to provide these meals. And this aspect highlights the importance of community contributions in such programs. The other last two main cost drivers were monitoring and evaluation at about 12%, and establishing or running community groups. So again, because we're using a center-based platform, we had to rely on not only establishing parenting groups, but also ensuring that they were running throughout the intervention and post-intervention. And the last pie chart there, we're looking at the NIP startup as well as the current recurrent costs. Looking at the startup, we see that they made up almost 25%, which is about a quarter of all the costs. And I guess as expected, the majority of the costs, which is about 75%, was for running the intervention. Here, we present the results of the cost analysis, focusing on the cost efficiency. We see that the overall cost estimate, this is the total annualized cost of the program, was about $200,000 US. Or this translates into about $160 per child, $41 per beneficiary, and $219 per household. So what's our takeaway? This is the first study to provide evidence on the total incremental cost of implementing an agriculture and nutrition intervention through an early childhood development platform. The mapping of this cost to program activities highlights the drivers of cost, which is important for program implementers. This is mainly program implementers that are interested in monitoring program costs, as well as increasing efficiencies. In that, it helps them to understand which activities are the cost drivers, but as well as identifying the economies of scale. Now, showing how the program activities are aligned to value chain typologies could also aid program implementers in decision-making around future program design. Based on the success of the NIP model, the Malawi government, in partnership with World Bank, is scaling up this intervention to about 13 districts across Malawi. They're targeting children under 5, and the main objective of the program is to actually improve the coverage as well as the utilization of early childhood development services with focus on nutrition, stimulation, and early learning. And as I said, they're targeting under 5 children. Also, what is interesting to note is that Zomba district, where we implemented NIP, was actually one of the districts that is benefiting from the scale up. To summarize, what are we doing with the scale-up program that the government of Malawi is doing? We're collecting cost data for the nation scale-up so that we're able to explore the economic cost of implementation at scale. Again, looking at the two programs, as already highlighted, NIP was from small scale, but also NGO-based, as opposed to the government scale-up, which is at large scale, but also funded by the government. So comparing the two, it also helps us to see, the fidelity in our assessments. And lastly, in addition to looking at this, the activities will help us generate the critical country level information that we need on the cost for planning and scaling up of nutrition sensitive interventions. And in addition, those also contribute critically needed empirical evidence on the costs, working across the sectors for scaling up nutrition efforts, for supporting financial projections for multi-sector strategies to improve nutrition and health outcomes. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Aisha. So today, Aisha presented evidence on costs of the multi-sectoral approach in Malawi. Those cost data have also been used, Aisha, if I can promote some of the other use of the costing data per se, in a cost effectiveness analysis of the program, as well as a benefit cost analysis. And we have presented those results at another time in greater detail, I think last year at ANH, but we wanted to dig deep and show how the costing work can actually inform the planning cycle and be used to support government decisions. So a focus on the costing today. So thank you very much for that presentation. Now I would like to invite Sagun KC from Helen Keller International, and he will share some preliminary cost estimates at a large scaled up. And I think this really must be one of the first of its kind. The Suahara 2 multi-sectoral nutrition program is a national program in Nepal. And Sagun, welcome, and we're excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks, Carol. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen and we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste. My name is Sagun Kesi. I work at Helen Keller International on M&E. Today, I'm representing the SIMS Nutrition Project team to share some preliminary results on costing of Suahara 2nd, a multi-sector nutrition program in Nepal. I'll be introducing the Suahara project. I'll briefly explain the study design, and I'll present some early estimates of financial and economic cost. Suhara Second is a multi-sector nutrition program supported by USAID. It aims to improve the nutritional status of women and children in 1,000-day period by improving maternal and child dietary diversity and reduce child stunting. Suhara has designed interventions on nutrition, health, ag, governance, and focuses on the improvement of health and nutrition behavior, gender equity, social inclusion, and public-private partnership. Now, the key Suhara interventions include counseling and household level and community events, use of mass media, and capacity building of healthcare workers and community volunteers. The program reaches over 900,000 households with around 1.5 million women and young children across 42 of 77 districts of Nepal. Costing and economic evaluation of Suhara program is a part of SIMS Nutrition Project funded by the Gates Foundation with the collaborative effort of the partners you can see in the slides below. SIMS project has developed the standardized method for measuring cost and cost effectiveness of the integrated nutrition programs to apply this common approach framework to the large-scale multi-sector nutrition programs to estimate the cost and benefits. So following the SIMS common approach, we aligned the Suhara program to the SIMS typology. This mapping actually enables to normalize highly complicated program pathways into a standard comparable model, grouping the intervention into standard buckets that you can see here in the left. Moving forward, we define the possible set of inputs for these interventions and potential costs that are required to deliver these inputs. And as the last step, we select from a series of outputs and outcomes that we're concerned of. And that's how we mapped Suhara into the standard SIMS typology. Moving into the costing exercise, we are collecting data on financial and economic cost. For the financial cost, it includes the annualized program expenditure in terms of salaries, supplies, vehicle transport charges, infrastructure, etc. And for the economic costing, data on the value of resources provided by the participants, including the beneficiaries in terms of out-of-pocket expenses and opportunity or cost of time is collected. So the study purposefully sampled 4 districts, considering their involvement in Suhara evaluation to align the results. 1 rural and 1 urban municipality is selected from within the district, and 1 ward is selected from each of those municipalities. For economic costing, a comprehensive qualitative study is executed, sampling various cadre at center, district, and municipal level with staffs, frontline workers, government partners, healthcare workers, village model farms, and 1,000-day beneficiaries. And to estimate the economic cost, we triangulate between the qualitative interviews, work plans, and observations, estimating the opportunity cost in time and out-of-pocket expenses associated with participating in Suhara activities for these beneficiaries, staffs, and other stakeholders. For financial costing, the expenditure data is collected from national consortium partners and district level implementation partners. Financial expenditure data is entered and modeled in the Excel-based tool. And then for the final step, cost effectiveness and cost efficiency of the program is generated by dividing the overall cost estimate by the cost per beneficiary reached. And eventually, net benefits will be computed once the result from Suhara impact evaluation is available. So far, we have completed qualitative data collection of 3 districts. We couldn't reach the 4th district due to COVID situation. We're trying to get some interviews done there virtually. Till date, overall, we have completed 150 interviews. Hence, the finding that we are presenting right now is not final and only preliminary indications. So to estimate the economic cost of participating in Suhara, we first need to understand how many people of different types are actually participating in Suhara activities. And for each of those types, what is the value of their time? And we estimate that using the Motley shadow ways. And here's an example of how we move from our interview data to the cost estimate. We use interview data, for example, to calculate how much time beneficiaries are spending in community events and health mothers group, and how much out-of-pocket expense they are spending in these activities. We multiply activity time by ways. We add that total to the out-of-pocket expense and sum across all different activities to estimate the total monthly economic cost of that type of participant. Now, summarizing total annual economic cost for each district by activity type, we see that the primary drivers of cost are community events and household visits. By cadre, we see that beneficiaries are primary contributors, followed by the female community health volunteers. So what this suggests is that SUARA program is really benefiting from a lot of investment from the community. Summarizing the financial cost, as expected, the major portion, about 70% of the cost is salary and then travel. And by activity, again, community events are the most expensive ones. So these are very early results. We still need to complete qualitative data collection of the 4th district, include the national financial expense into these results, and generate the overall cost estimate. And finally, cost effectiveness and the benefit cost results will be generated once the SUARA impact evaluation data is available. And we're expecting to have the final results by the end of next year. We believe that the evidence generated from this study will be very crucial in designing and planning effective and efficient multi-sector programs and interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagun. Thank you for so efficiently presenting a very complex evaluation of a complex program. We do have a question in the chat box, which we'll answer at the end of our final presentation. And now I'd like to invite Chloe Hewitt from Stony Brook University, who will present some results on a systematic review of exploring which benefits are currently being incorporated in economic evaluations of multi-sectoral strategies for health. Chloe, over to you.
Thanks, Carol.
We're seeing your we're seeing, yeah, there you go. Looks great. We can hear you and see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, everyone, so thanks for listening. My name is Chloe Hewitt, and I'm presenting today on behalf of my co-authors from a recent systematic review titled Measurement of Benefits and Economic Evaluations of Nutrition Interventions in Low and Middle Income Countries. Before we get started, let's define some technical terms. We defined benefits in this analysis as any tangible or intangible impact or outcome of a multi-sectoral nutrition intervention which has value to individuals, households, and communities in low and middle income countries. Cost effectiveness analysis is a type of economic analysis that compares the costs of an intervention to one benefit at a time in a cost effectiveness ratio. Cost utility analysis compares costs to potentially multiple health-related outcomes in terms of utility measures, which are related to satisfaction or lack thereof experienced in different health states. An example of these outcomes are disability-adjusted life years, or DALYs. Benefit cost analysis compares costs to potentially multiple intervention benefits which have been monetized so that you can compare the monetary value of benefits to intervention costs and see which is larger. This review aimed to characterize the types of nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions that have been included in recent economic evaluations. We assessed the range of terminology and methodological approaches used to value the benefits coming from these interventions. Studies were included that were published since 2010 in English and assessed one of the 78 intervention types included in the UN REACH Compendium of Actions for Nutrition. Studies had to report an economic ratio, in other words, a cost effectiveness, cost utility, or benefit cost ratio, and they had to include at least one nutrition-related benefit, such as improved nutrition status, improvement in food security, dietary diversity, etc. A total of 2,794 studies were screened and 93 studies met all inclusion criteria. Only 8 studies evaluated multi-sectoral programs where beneficiaries received interventions from more than one sector. The most evaluations were conducted in the health sector at 43% of total studies. For the various sectors, there were a few common interventions included in economic evaluations. For example, health interventions were primarily related to a management of acute malnutrition or zinc supplementation. Food and agriculture interventions were primarily mass fortification or biofortification. Social protection studies dealt with food vouchers and unconditional cash transfers. And WASH programs evaluated were mainly household water treatment and storage or sanitation access. Across the various sectors, there was considerable variation in what type of economic evaluation was used. For example, among WASH studies, benefit cost analyses were more common than cost effectiveness analyses, and no cost utility analyses were conducted. Studies of health intervention most commonly performed cost effectiveness analyses, followed by cost utility analyses. The food and agriculture sector relied primarily on cost utility analyses and benefit cost analyses. Social protection studies mainly were cost effectiveness analyses, followed by benefit cost and cost utility analyses. 11 studies conducted more than one type of economic analysis. 5 of these included both cost effectiveness and cost utility analyses, whereby illnesses averted or cured were converted to DALYs or QALYs averted, and 6 placed a monetary value on either illness or DALYs averted using benefit cost analysis. This is a table summarizing the benefits that were included in ratios by sector. There's a lot of information here, but let's focus on a few summary points. The most common benefit was the improvement of nutrition status at 56% of all ratios, but this varied by sector. 72% of health sector ratios, 71% of multi-sectoral ratios, and 56% of food agriculture ratios included this benefit type, while only 31% of social protection ratios and 7% of WASH ratios did so. Health improvements that were not related to nutrition, such as malaria and HIV, were included in 9% of the health sector ratios and 18% of multi-sectoral ratios, but in none of the ratios assessing food and agriculture, social protection, or WASH interventions. WASH ratios, when they captured any benefits resulting from health improvements, instead tended to either monetize them, to measure the productivity gain resulting from improved health, and or assess beneficiaries' out-of-pocket costs or indirect costs, such as lost days of work from illness. And this reflects the high number of benefit cost analyses conducted within the sector. Notably, only around 1/3 of all ratios considered cost savings of any kind. For instance, 47% of benefit cost ratios included beneficiary cost savings, compared to 12% of cost effectiveness and 13% of cost utility analysis ratios. Finally, with the exception of WASH sector evaluations, the inclusion of benefits unrelated to nutrition was relatively rare. So other sectors could consider expanding the range of benefits beyond nutrition and conduct benefit cost analyses rather than cost utility or cost effectiveness analyses if their benefits are diverse and can be monetized. There also is scope for more studies to include cognitive, education, or productivity gains associated with investments in nutrition. Looking at some of the broader trends, we found that the majority of studies focused on a narrow band of nutrition outcomes, namely wasting, stunting, diarrhea, anemia, and vitamin A deficiency. These were for nutritional status improvements as measured by anthropometric assessment, morbidity, mortality, and measurement of DALYs. While these outcomes are certainly pertinent to the sector, they're focused on to the exclusion of other outcomes. Finally, very few studies included more than 1 or 2 benefits. We concluded from this that the economic evidence base so far is pretty limited, and given the wide variety of benefits that come from multi-sectoral nutrition programs, there is work to be done in expanding the potential for economic evaluations to include more of these benefits, so that we can better understand the true economic value of multi-sectoral nutrition programs. A few conclusions come from this work, and I encourage you to read the full paper when it is published to learn more. First, the sector that the intervention comes from is strongly related to what type of evaluation is conducted and which benefits are included. Health sector and multi-sectoral evaluations tended to focus on nutrition status improvements and conduct cost effectiveness analyses and cost utility analyses. Other sectors were more mixed in which benefits to include, and with the exception of social protection, conducted benefit cost analyses more often. We propose that more economic evaluations should be conducted on non-health sector interventions and on multi-sectoral interventions, as economic evidence here is limited so far. Regardless of sector, there are several benefits that are often omitted, including women's empowerment and mental or social benefits. Some of these gaps in the existing evidence are due to practical or methodological challenges in benefit measurement, such as placing a monetary value on benefits that do not have a market value. These are intractable challenges that will require future research to advance methods for measurement and quantification. Finally, one current evidence gap that should be easier to fill is that we noted that cost savings are not usually included in economic evaluations. These can be an important benefit of nutrition interventions and can be included in any type of economic evaluation. So it should be feasible to include these benefits in more evaluations in the future. That's it for me. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Chloe. That was perfectly timed to 8 minutes and very clear. Thank you so much for sharing the results on our review on the different types of benefits included in multi-sectoral nutrition strategies, which has been a concern to many of us working in this area. We are focused on really wanting to improve nutritional status, but recognizing that there are many other benefits that, Chloe, that you summarized so beautifully. What I'd like to do now is take the next 9 minutes, I believe, correct me, Julie, if I'm wrong, to address questions I will answer questions on behalf of Chris Kemp, who had to drop off, for Aisha, for Sagun, and for Chloe. I see that we have one question already in the chat box, and Sagun, I will let you answer this question. I'm happy to jump in if need be, but I think you'll be able to respond to this. Jan Lowe asks, given the diversity of partners in the Suhara Consortium, did you have to set up a common coding scheme for costs at the beginning of the exercise and get each partner to use it? This may be a two-part response from your end, Sagun, and we can jump in and talk about how we map the codes. Over to you, Sagun.
Thanks, Carol. And thank you, Jan, for the question. Although the Suhara Consortium includes implementation partners and the technical partners, the charging of program is done in standard program financial codes to start with, and seems developed and adopted a standard coding scheme to map the coding approach used by Suhara, HKI, and all the consortium partners and districts. So yes, a common scheme was used. Thank you.
And I'd like to just jump in to say that in Nepal, as many of you know, can be really challenging to obtain financial expenditure data. We got very lucky because the HKI office had an incredible financial accounting system and coded many of the activities and inputs. And as Sagun mentioned, we have a tool available to all of you that maps any accounting codes from any system to our standardized SEAMS nutrition code. So another question, this question comes from Surabhi Chaturvedi, and the question is, really good presentation. Community events or awareness programs seem to be a big component of the costs. Is there a plan also to study the cost benefit, cost effectiveness of behavior change interventions? If yes, would like to hear more about how would you standardize what would be considered a benefit. The Malawi model is very different from the Suhara model, not just in terms of scale, but also intervention, focus, and format. Sagun or Aisha, would you like to answer either of those questions?
Yes, I think definitely there is a plan to study the cost, benefit, and effectiveness of the activities, including the behavior change interventions. And that for that, we need to wait for the results from the Suhara impact evaluation, which is pending right now. That will proceed on analyzing the cost, benefit, and effect.
Sagun, yeah, I think your you were fading in and out. Aisha, would you like to respond to that, to the question?
Thank you for your question. Actually, we've already done this for NEEP. I'll put a link on the paper. By looking at the benefits that we looked at, it was deaths abated as well as lifetime productivity and a bit on the agriculture production. So again, on the cost, we're mainly looking at the program and the community contributions. And on the same, when we're looking at the cost outcomes, it was mainly the change in production diversity, production variety score, diet adequacy, individual dietary diversity score, as well as the change in household dietary diversity score. So I hope that answers your question. If not, then I'll also pass it on to Carol and Amy, who can jump in.
Yes, so it's a great question, Sarabi, and this you bring up the idea that the Malawi program is very different than Suahara. So I'd like to invite you to remember that one of the steps in the SEAMS nutrition approach is to map the activities along the program impact pathway. And in that way, eventually we will all get to many of the same kinds of changes. So for instance, it may be that community events and households are all leading, as Aisha said, to a change in consumption, an increase in dietary intake, as long as the program is measuring what is, how does that dietary diversity or dietary intake affect other indicators like vitamin A consumption, or does it, are they linking it to changes in nutritional status? As long as you have results from an impact evaluation for your behavior change, we can then match those results, take those impact estimates, convert them into cases of stunted averted or vitamin A deficiency averted, and we can look at DALYs averted. We can even monetize deaths averted. So it's very important to use that program impact pathway and to combine the results with the results from an impact assessment. Thanks for your question. Oh, so we have another. Okay, I think we had a question from Elaine. And I believe Elaine, I'm going to read the question while we wait for another one to come in. Elaine Gray asked, could you remind me how the typologies are used and how they work? We're really trying to emphasize rigor in program impact pathways and how we translate them into meaningful and more proximal responsive indicators to measure results of programming, rather than a singular focus on stunting, for example, connecting to Chloe's point about the importance of understanding the spectrum of benefits. I am wondering, can these typologies be easily mapped to existing program impact pathways, or do PIPs need to be largely adjusted to fit the SEAMS approach? And yes, thank you for a beautiful comment, Elaine. In fact, we build on whatever existing program impact pathway. We recognize that a lot of programs may not have a program impact pathway. I'd like to point out that you can use a theory of change. You can also use a results framework. The key is to understand costs and benefits along any of those descriptors of the program. How do you get from the activity to the outcome of interest? And how do you capture those intermediate outcomes along the pathway? Amy, I know that you're on the call. Just going to invite you, if you, since we have a minute, if there's anything you would like to add to this conversation. These are great questions. Amy Margolis's project is part of the SEAMS nutrition as well.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Aisha, and everyone else for your great presentations. I was just going to add a very small plug after that. You know, Carol made a great point about working with the existing program impact pathways for each particular program, but just to go back and not to sound like a broken record, but kind of the purpose of the common approach is to take similar steps to do that mapping process. So the actual codes for SEAMS, for the inputs and the activities that is standardized, and that's kind of what we're moving toward, to just facilitate those comparisons between these very different types of programs. So it's totally fine if your program has a different type of impact pathway, but kind of what we're moving toward is some standardization so we can build that evidence base and hopefully learn a lot from the different distribution of costs and the way the programs are basically creating impact, so we can feed that information back into the policy and program sphere.
Thank you so much, Amy. And there's not a better way to end the question session for the first 4 presentations. Thank you all to the presenters. You did an excellent job. I'm pleased now to introduce Winston Tan, who will be presenting on, who will be presenting on blockchain technology adoption in the digitalization of food systems, a scoping review. Over to you, Winston.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. My presentation will be a bit of a departure from the theme of the rest of the brilliant presentations here, but I hope you enjoy it. So let's hop in. Let me just share my screen. Am I doing it right? Okay, can you see my screen well?
Yeah, we can see it, but you're in presenter mode. So if you swap screens or just go into, we can see your slides, not the large slides.
Okay, but will this be okay? Just go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Yeah, that's good. Now you have it.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So hi. My name is Winston Tan, and I am a PhD candidate at the Institute of Development Studies, IDS, in the UK. So in this paper that I'm presenting today, me and my colleague Lola Jiang from Undercurrent Capital in Singapore has decided to look at the adoption of blockchain in the food systems. And in doing so, we want to pinpoint the gaps of knowledge in the current development of the food supply chain. So what is blockchain? In very, very simple terms, it is basically a shared, unalterable ledger for recording the history of transactions. So what blockchain does is that there is a single database that all participating actors in a supply chain has an identical copy. So this gives them the ability to see where particular shipments are and what are their conditions. So there's one state of truth distributed across all members. So now we start to see quite a lot of blockchain food products coming into the market. So on the right of the screen is an example of a pioneer application of blockchain in rice production in Taiwan. I can talk more about this example during our Q&A later if you'd like. So we decided on doing a scoping review to ask how does research address blockchain technology adoption in the digitalization of the food systems. We design our search terms as in the gray box, and we search in 3 databases. So the final results that we got after a series of screening is 147 papers, which we mapped against an adapted framework that considers food systems and also blockchain adoption factors. So in these sessions, I'm just going to discuss the few highlights of our findings. So we analyze for country income levels, and we see that blockchain studies are really concentrated in high income countries and less so in middle income. And we didn't find any blockchain studies in low income countries at all. This suggests that there is an inequitable adoption and access to the technology. Also, there are different focuses in different income clusters. So high income countries are more concerned with using blockchain to address the issues of transparency, traceability, and supply chain management, as you see in the blue box. And in middle income countries, the focus is really more on how to improve food productivity and also natural resource management, such as irrigation, as in the red box. So in the supply chain, blockchain adoption is quite evenly spread out across different segments. So we did a stakeholder analysis and we found that there is an unequal adoption of blockchain by big industry actors versus the smaller and medium enterprises. So we found these discrepancies of adoption across the different segments in processing, packaging, and retail part of the supply chain. And interestingly, we did not find any study relating to informal vendor. So these dynamics are just another indicator of the inequitable adoption of blockchain in the food systems. So despite all the inequalities that we have found, we see hardly any paper looking at equality and equity issues in the food systems. And we found no papers looking at the issues of rights and agency in the food systems. And this includes rights to privacy, rights to food, rights to health. So this is a glaring gap. In terms of the downstream outcomes, we found only a handful of studies. So only 2 papers looked at health outcomes and 3 papers looked at the nutrition outcomes and no papers looked at the dietary outcomes of blockchain adoption. So in this diagram, the green box is where we found most of our studies in relation to food safety and quality. However, the linkages between food safety and quality has already been clearly established in health and nutrition literature. So for example, food safety is found to be a main driver of food choices among consumers in low and middle income countries, which the ANH Academy has discussed at length during the past year. So our findings suggest that research within the food system is siloed, and there is a weak focus on system approach that connects the upstream aspects in supply chain with the downstream outcomes. In terms of thematic findings, we found 4 main themes. The first one is food safety and quality, which is the most common reason for adoption of blockchain in food systems. The second one is trust. And the third one is accountability. And the last one is supply chain management efficiency. So I won't go much further into these themes because of a short of time, but I would say that in the context of this discussion, of this session, that blockchain is increasingly being used for accountability in a lot of food aid and nutrition intervention in low and middle income countries. It is still quite a new development in that areas. So we don't see a lot of very established case studies, but in our review, I think we found 1 or 2 papers discussing it in relation to food aid. So in terms of cost and cost effectiveness, we can understand it from a couple of different perspectives. The first one is from a business operation perspective, where blockchain can reduce costs, especially in crisis management, such as food recalls. The cost of running a blockchain is considered to be relatively low because costs are distributed across the supply chain actors. So what this means is that the initial investment of setting up the blockchain system is relatively low, and therefore the risk of capital loss due to failures to the implementers are lowered. And from the consumer perspective, the jury is still out whether if using blockchain means higher cost for consumers or lower. So this is a research gap that we haven't found clear-cut evidence. And of course, beyond material, cost also includes environmental costs and human costs. And we haven't found any research looking into this area of cost studies. So this leads to our findings of the gaps and future research priorities. The first is to address research silos, where we would like to see more clear-cut linkages between the upstream aspects of the food systems with their downstream outcomes. So what does blockchain mean to our health, to our nutrition, food behaviors, and diets in concrete sense? And the second one is the need for more critical assessment on the feasibility of blockchain through more real-world case studies. We need to find out which challenges in food system can or cannot be resolved by blockchain. And is blockchain just a passing fad, or are we seeing the tip of the iceberg of its full potential? So as I pointed out previously, cost is a continuum, and we need to look at different kinds of cost in the adoption of a technology. We also need to have more research on how blockchain intersect with other technologies. The third one is that we need more studies about the governance of blockchain. So in this review, we see that the emerging of digital governance with food governance. And for now, the regulatory environment of blockchain is very much still in its infancy. And it is still very much confined within the realm of finance, aka cryptocurrencies. So interestingly, just from yesterday, there's a quote from a BBC article that puts this governance concern rather succinctly. It said that governments of each jurisdiction need to, with full transparency and confidence, give us the full regulations about what we can and cannot do. And it needs to fit what the technology actually does. So what is clear here is that there is still much to be done in terms of governance. And lastly, and very, very importantly, we need more studies on the ethical implications and social repercussions of technology. So we see that the pace of technological advancement today is increasing at an exponential pace, as illustrated in this chart. So we have the tendency to adopt a piece of technology for its benefits, but without really thinking, without really scrutinizing the potential repercussions. So a very good example is how we are grappling with the problems of disinformation in relation to social media technology. So learning from the past, how do we then approach new technologies like blockchain? So what I would like to say is that we would very much like to see social research moving from just being reactive to also being proactive, proactively address the kind of problems, the kind of ethical problems that might arise from new technologies. And to do so, we need to address the issues of equity in its multiple forms, and that includes digital equity, material equity, and social equity. And to study equity, we need to confront the questions about power dynamics among stakeholders, the issues of data ownership, information privacy, and also upholding the fundamental rights of every individual to food, health, privacy, and freedom. Now that concludes my personal presentation. Today. I know that there are a lot to unpack in our review findings, so please feel free to ask away in the Q&A or get in touch with either me or Lola later. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston. What a fascinating presentation. Really happy to learn about this review. We are able to go to 7:35, so let me go ahead and call your attention to two questions. The first is, I'll read them and you can answer them both, and we'll see if something else comes in. Janlo asks, is the cost of developing and deploying blockchain approaches restricting their use in non-industrial chains? That's the first question. And the second comment and question by Jody Harris is, fascinating, did any individual papers discuss the ethical implications of different groups being left out of new technologies, or were these generally approached as a positive technology without an equity angle? If you could answer those two questions, I'd be very grateful. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So yes, I think that there is a common theme in both of these questions, which is that, in terms of the answers, is that it's an issue of silos. And so I'm just thinking back to a lot of, our understanding of food security. Initially it started off as just being a technical way of providing a solution to food security, but eventually it gradually moves on to accessibility, to social protections, to policy, and now we're going on to rights. So I think that I'm seeing similar progression in the blockchain adoption. At this point of time, I mean, if you think about it, that the earliest paper that we found was just dated back as early as 2017. So at this point of time, it's still very much discussed in a very technical sense, and we see huge silos where different pockets of researchers are just doing their own things without really taking a system approach. So in terms of the ethical implications, that dialogue is discussed within the bigger picture of the digitalization, like the agriculture 4.0, like that includes robotics, AI, big data use. So in this big picture, but not really, I didn't find any studies that studies the specific characteristics that relates to blockchain. So what does blockchain specifically means for social equity, for ethical understandings, and that it could be explained through the age of the studies, where a lot of papers are still very, very new. I mean, this whole technology is still very new, but this could also be explained with the whole siloed approach to research in digital research. And yeah, deploying blockchain approaches in restricting use in non-industrial chains. So I don't quite understand what you mean by non-industrial chain. I assume that that's what you meant is the application of blockchain in non-industrial sectors. At this point of time, the blockchain is really being explored in a multitude of ways. And even in industrial ways, or even in non-industrial ways, just now I pointed out, it's being explored, being trialed in what they call food aid interventions, in food crisis intervention. So, but I think at this point of time, most, like when we talk about blockchain, we think of cryptocurrencies, we think of Bitcoins, and that is the hype now. But the underlying technology is blockchain. And what I'm presenting today is to see how that underlying technology is being applied to food systems. And obviously, we are still in a very early stage now. I hope I answered your question in some ways.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of the presenters. I hope that our audience agrees that they did a fantastic job staying on time and being engaged. So thank you, everybody. I believe, Juliet, I'm not sure if you have any parting words, but I believe at this time our session is over, and we look forward to hearing from you. Get in touch with us with any additional questions.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, just if everyone, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Again, thank you so much to our presenters. Before you drop off, we just have a really quick feedback poll. If you want to just give us your thoughts on the session, that would be great. Help us create future sessions as well. So I will launch that now. And we also invite you to join our next panel session at 3:55 British Summer Time. That will be on food systems evidence, priorities and powers. So that should be a really great session, open to everyone. So we strongly recommend you come. And again, please visit the ANH Academy website to see the rest of the program for the week today and tomorrow. So thank you everyone again for joining, and have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you, ANH organizers, Julia, Abel, and team. Thank you so much.